In terms of the first speaker, Shawn is president and COO of ProAct Safety, internationally recognized for his work in safety excellence, and he's literally helped hundreds of organizations across every major industry. He covers aviation, pharmaceuticals, food, automotive industry, and banking, to name just a few. He's also the host of a highly acclaimed weekly podcast series, Safety Culture Excellence. He's a columnist for several magazines and co-author of several books on safety excellence and changing culture on a safety culture basis, as well as excellence in performance. National Safety Council refers to him as a global safety excellence expert and has listed him in the top 40 rising stars of safety. I'm delighted to welcome Shawn to give the first of the plenary keynotes. He's going to follow the theme of the summit and focus on, or look at focusing on value, not activities, with leadership in difficult times. So without further ado, I'll introduce you to Shawn Galloway.
Thank you. Good morning. I've been employed since I was 10 years old. I had my first job. My first job was a paper route. I would get up before school at 4 o'clock in the morning. Papers would get delivered to my home, I'd bundle them, and about 4:30 in the morning I would set out by myself on my bicycle to deliver paper around the town. Times have certainly changed since then. How many of you put your kids on a bicycle at 4:30 in the morning and send them out by themselves? Times have changed. Times are always going to be changing. When we change, when we improve, when we face difficult times, it's easy for us to fall into the more is better trap. We need to do more. Most organizations that I work with and even speak with, more is not always the answer. It's how do we do things better? How do we make sure we're focused? My first tax-paying job, if you will, at 16, my father set me down and told me something that I've never forgotten. He said to me, "Shawn, no one will ever owe you a job. You have to show and demonstrate new value every day." And that stuck with me. That's been my work ethic. But it's the value piece. Are we delivering real value? During the financial downturn in the late 2000s, I was working with a lot of organizations that were struggling through this time. Even this past weekend, I've been contacted by a few organizations across multiple countries that have contacted us for help because they feel as though their safety culture is struggling. And I would argue this early in, then perhaps the safety culture wasn't as strong to begin with if it's struggling right now. Like Peter Drucker said, your organizational systems are perfectly designed to give you the results you are currently receiving. So we all have cultures. We all have safety cultures. Safety culture, the term, has only been around since 1986 with two major events that prompted that, the Challenger explosion and Chernobyl. With those two events, the term started to become popular, but we're still not really sure on what safety culture is all about. We're not really sure about what safety excellence is all about. I view that as kind of my role. That's the thing that drives me, is to continuously challenge how we define excellence and safety. So during the financial downturn, I was working with an organization that they had been very good in safety, but they felt their culture was starting to slip based on some of the things that they could observe. They had me come in, and I was assessing the culture. It was about a 1,000-person operation in this one location, and we got on the topic of feedback for safety. What are we talking about? What are the conversations like? I was with a group of union members of this organization, and this topic led to a conversation I'm never going to forget. I've led hundreds of these assessments. I wish I could remember details from all of them, but what this one lady said to me, I've never forgotten. Again, we were on the topic of feedback for safety. What are the conversations like? And this is what she said. You know, in a few months, I'm going to retire after 30 years here. The only time they've ever talked to me about safety is when I've done something wrong. Just once before I retire, I wish they'd tell me when I've done something right. Even though they've had good safety performance, that's why their culture was suffering. I've never seen a company punished into excellence, but that's the trap they had fallen into. Leadership was concerned. How they were acting, how they were coming across was affecting how people we're thinking about things. I'd like to share with you a four-focus mindset that has been helpful for several of the companies that I've worked with and how they frame and how they think about things. As we all know, all progress begins by thinking differently. And it's how we come across, how we as leaders, how we come across. Our behaviors, what we say, behavioral integrity, what you say matches what you do. Like what Ralph Waldo Emerson once said, what you do speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you say. So how do we come across? It's important that we realize we do need to hold people accountable for certain things, but excellence in safety is not defined by the absence of injuries. We've fallen into that trap in a lot of organizations. If we have 0 injuries, we're going to be excellent in safety. I've seen several organizations that have had 0 recordables, 0 incidents for a long period of time, and then catastrophe occurs. Here's how I define excellence in safety. Excellence in safety is the ability to achieve great results, knowing precisely how you achieved those great results, with still a shared mindset that continuous improvement is always possible. A lot of organizations are able to get great results. And the challenge as we start coming out of these times is not our ability to get great results. Many companies, and yours included, has demonstrated that ability. The challenge is knowing precisely how you got there so you can continue with that level of performance, but also know where the improvement opportunities exist. We talked about best practices. We heard that this morning already. I've seen several organizations that have purposefully discontinued using that term, best practice, because what they feel is they fall into the cognitive bias. They feel as though they fall into the trap that that must be the way you do things. They've changed the terminology. It's just terminology, but the term they're using now is better practices. Because what they're fearful of is if we adopt a best practice, might we stop looking for a better way? There's always going to be a better way. Look in your industry back 10 years, 20 years ago. The things that were viewed as acceptable practices are not viewed as acceptable today because somebody was willing to say there has to be a better way. In North America, when the first high-rises were being built in the late 1880s, we used to plan for how many fatalities we would have based on how many floors were being constructed. Thankfully, we don't think that way today. But the way we progress is by realizing there will always be a better way if we search for it. This is why excellence in safety is not just the ability to get great results and knowing how you got there. It's still maintaining the mindset that we can always be better. We can always improve. When I worked with Cintas, one of the terms they use in their corporate culture, I'm always fascinated by organizations that have books written about their culture. Cintas uses the term positive discontent. What that means is we celebrate our successes and we always know we can be better. I think it's a great term to use in an organization. As we're going through the times that we're going through now, the 4-focus mindset that I want to start with is the leadership mindset. Our focus, how we come across. We know that if the leaders don't lead, the followers aren't going to follow. Do we come across as confident? I served 8 years in the Army, in the United States Army, and I could tell the leaders that were not confident in their plans. Think about how unwilling people are to follow somebody that's not confident. Even if we have the difficult times that we're in, we have to look at how we come across. What's our behavior? If we're viewed as fearful, if we're viewed as uncertain, think about the culture that that creates. So we have to first look at where we're at. What's the leadership style that we have today, and what's the leadership style we need to move forward? Leadership style, of course, is situational. It's different based on the situation that you're in. Sometimes we need cajoling and collaboration. That's a critical part of leadership. Sometimes we also do need command and control. On my flight coming out here from Houston yesterday, the flight attendant gets on the loudspeaker and says, "In control of our flight today is Captain. I don't want a collaborative flying experience. I want a command and control flying experience." So we have to look at the leadership style that we have and how are we coming across? What are our behaviors? we also have to get past this idea of don't bring me a problem unless we have a solution. Now is the time for us to be willing to share what we see, what the challenges are. If we can't air them, we're not going to be able to determine and collaborate on how to overcome them. We also have to make sure we have the right strategy. Most organizations have a strategy in safety. Now is the time to revisit it and say, what's our strategy really focusing on? A major owner-operator in the oil and gas sector that we've been working with for many years, a good friend of mine's in their financial department. They're moving some people around in Houston, and they're consolidating some teams. This guy's in the financial group, and they decided to go to a team-building exercise. They chose bowling. That was the thing they wanted to go do as a team. As they got to the bowling alley, before they went and picked out their bowling balls, they were all promptly set down and told they have to fill out a job safety analysis form. When you disengage the very people whose engagement is critical to be successful, we're not winning in safety. But this is the strategy that we've tended to fall back into, is are we focusing on winning or are we focusing on failing less? The measurements that we use to drive our performance, if they're mostly the lagging indicator performance, it sends the message that it's April, folks, we need to work harder to fail less. That's not a strategy of success. The absence of failure does not necessarily mean the presence of success. But the strategy, if you could show the slide back again, in our 2013 book, this is the strategy we find in a lot of organizations still today. It's a 4-part strategy. See if you've ever experienced this. Number 1, you look at your incident rate. Number 2, you set a new incident rate goal or objective. Number 3, you develop a list of things to do. Number 4, you execute on that and you say, how did we do? The problem with this is actually when we achieve improved performance. We fall into that correlation causation trap we know to try to avoid. We say we've done these things, we had this improved performance, therefore we had this improved performance because of the things we were doing. Not necessarily. Sometimes we're successful in spite of the things we were doing. Sometimes it's normal variation. But if we're doing things to try to improve safety that people don't see the value in, and we're able to achieve improved performance, it's never sustainable because we end with the culture of have to rather than a culture of want to. So this is the time to relook at the strategy and say, are we focusing on a real strategy or is it a bunch of initiatives and a bunch of things we're doing to try to improve safety with the goal of failing less? Strategy as a business concept has only been around since the early 1960s. It's been a part of military for thousands of years. But I like what Michael Porter, who's written probably the most about strategy, what he writes about that I wanted to highlight here, it's fit among a company's activities. But also what Porter points out is strategy is also about what not to do. What are we not going to do? What are we going to stop doing that doesn't add current value? In our 2015 book, we wanted to reframe how people look at strategy. And that's one of the predictions that we're going to see a lot of organizations focusing on is developing a real strategy. Strategy is not about failing less. Strategy is, are we capturing and delivering value? It's a framework of choices, trade-offs, small bets to determine how we're going to win. It's not just about failing less. It's, are we adding value to the customers of our safety program and improvement efforts? If they don't see the value in things, we have to look at, well, is our purpose just to drive numbers down or is our purpose to really drive value? Georgia Pacific, the large pulp and paper organization, we've consulted with them for probably 15 years now. Several years ago, they changed the motto, they changed the mission statement of the Global Health and Safety Organization. Their Global Health and Safety mission statement is the following: to continuously improve the quality of life of the employees on and off the job. That's what drives them. It says nothing about incident rates. When they have a new initiative, they will balance that as a qualifier. How is that going to add value to the employees on and off the job? Again, if we're doing things in safety that they don't see value in, sometimes they're not going to see value in the things that we do. Sometimes there are things that we have to do that add value that the employees may not see it. But if they don't at least understand the perception of it, if they don't see the value, we end up with cultures of have to rather than cultures of want to. Show the slide for me, please. This is where, in our latest book, real contribution of value over a sustainable period of time, this is where organizations win. Are we capturing and delivering long-term value? So for this, people have to have a vision of success. And this is where we have to reframe how we currently define success in a lot of entities. If success is defined as no injuries, think about what that does from a mindset in the organization. I've argued for years that, with all due respect, zero incident goals can create risk-taking in an organization. Because if people think excellence is defined by zero injuries, here's the perception that we inadvertently allow to exist. If safety means not getting hurt, then anything that I do that doesn't get me hurt must be safe. It's flawed logic. People have to have a real vision of what success looks like. Now, I gave you the 30,000-foot view of excellence, the ability to get great results, etc. We have to look in your operations. You have to be able to drive that down to say, when we have zero injuries, what would we see that's common that tells us why? That's what culture really is. It's what's common in an organization. Common beliefs, common behaviors, common decision, common knowledge, and common stories. Are we doing things that are really adding value? Do people know where we're going? Do people really understand what success looks like in safety? Do they know how to navigate from where they're at to where they're going? It's like what the Cheshire Cat said in Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know where you're going, then any path will do. We have to define where we're going. That has to be operationally defined to the lowest levels of the organization so they know what safety excellence looks like. And if we can define excellence and safety in what's observable, that means we can coach it. You can't coach results, you coach for performance. And the next step in trying to become excellent in safety, regardless of the times that we're in, is allowing people to understand the destination, to see what it looks like so they know their role in achieving it. They have to be able to understand what success looks like, and they have to be able to know where they're going. Then as we measure our progress, we move from just a reliance on lagging indicators, your incident rates and costs. We move towards leading indicators. And in most organizations, leading indicators are measurements of activities. In a lot of organizations. And this, again, we fall back into that correlation causation trap. We did all these activities, we had improved performance, therefore. There's a next level of measurement that we created several years ago. We just call it transformational indicators. There are better ways to measure the contribution of value between your activities and your results. Let me give an example of that. This is an unfortunate experience that happened to me. It's an embarrassing story, but I tell it because I hope you'll see the value in it, and it will enhance the way you look at how we measure success and safety. September 15, 2012, I was out running errands. My younger sister was about to have her first child. Because whooping cough was coming back around in the United States, they wanted you to get vaccinated again, even if you were decades ago. I was standing in a grocery store pharmacy waiting to get this shot. Because it was mid-September, it's also flu season, coming upon flu season in Houston. So there were 12 other people that were standing in the pharmacy in front of me. There was no place to sit. Now, mind you, when I started that day, I felt healthy, I felt great, I felt top of the world, nothing's wrong with me. And I, too, have told people the absence of visible indicator, just because you don't have anything that's visibly wrong with you in health doesn't mean that you're truly healthy. I've been saying that, and I should have listened to my own advice. So because all the seats were taken, there was only one seat that was open, and it was attached to a blood pressure machine. You can probably tell where the story's going to go. I sat down in this seat, put my left arm in the cuff, and I pushed the red button, and it came back and said 175 over 107. That's in that seek medical attention now category. And I did. There was a First Alert clinic right next door, and I went over there and I was honest with the physician. Probably like a lot of you, I travel a lot. I don't always make the right choices in exercise and diet. I was honest with the physician. She said you need to lose about 10% of your body weight. You need to change your lifestyle, not a fad diet. You need to get on blood pressure medication. I'll tell you what, I was scared. I bought a home blood pressure monitoring kit. I was checking it multiple times a day. But that's where I discovered your blood pressure, while it's a leading indicator, it's transformative. Your blood pressure tells you the contribution of value between your health activities and choices and your health results. Think about if you're already exercising right, you already have a good lifestyle, and you check your blood pressure and your blood pressure's high, the answer isn't more exercise. It's finding the right thing. When we look at our efforts in safety, if we're doing things to improve safety, but people don't believe what we need them to believe, if they don't know what we need them to know, if they're not doing what we need them to do, those are better indicators. And sometimes an imprecise measurement of the right thing is better than a precise measurement of the wrong thing. Transformational indicators, when you look at it this way, there are two things. They tell you the most important leading indicator to pay attention to, but they tell you the value between your activities and your results. If we're training somebody on something, are we measuring what we call the safety IQ? Do people know what we need them to know? When I worked at the major government institute in the DC area, they have about 40,000 people coming on their campus every day. They have 30 major safety programs. They were doing a lot of things in safety, but with budget cuts, times are difficult. They need to make sure what we're doing is really adding value. So they went to each one of these program owners and said, you have to be concise. What are the 3 most important things people should know about this safety program? It took them a while to get the answers to these 90 questions, it turned out, and they went out and quizzed and polled a strong sample of the organization. No surprise, people didn't know the most important things, regardless of all the communication and all the meetings. So the answer wasn't, we need to do more. It's how do we make our communication stickier? How do we make it stick? So when you look at strategy, I encourage you to think about, have you defined success and safety? Do people know operationally what it looks like in the role that they do? What is success? Think about the Olympics examples. When the Olympics occurs hours ahead of you, you hear who medaled in an event because all our countries in the room here are chasing the medal count. Before, because of the time delay, you watch the performance. When you watch that performance, you say to yourself, that's why she got the gold, or that's why he got the silver, because you could see the performance that contributed to the result. We have to define success not just as the results, but the performance that yields it. We have to look at who leads, who manages safety. For safety really to be a value in any organization, it can't be delegated, but people need to know their precise roles and responsibilities. If you can keep the slide up for me for a second. You have to look at the roadmap. Where are we right now and where are we going? Every organization is going to continuously change. Change is the only thing constant in most organizations. But people need to know what the roadmap is. We need selection and alignment of the different programs. Sometimes we need to stop doing things that might be disengaging or demotivating. People are no longer adding new value. We need to make sure that what we measure is value add. Think about the transformational indicators. But we also have to measure progress. A study came out a few years ago that answered the question, what really motivates people in a work setting? That thousands of people keeping a journal, documenting what they were doing when they felt the most motivated and the most demotivated. The overwhelming conclusion that it turns out the most effective motivator in a work setting is visible progress towards a goal. Think about the days you've worked hard and felt as though you haven't scratched the surface versus the days you saw progress. Things are getting done. How do we show progress in safety if it's only defined by the absence of something? It has to be defined by the presence of something. Are we seeing the things we want? Is the knowledge level increasing? Do people see a sense of progress? You have to market safety. No, not for the things that you have to do. There's 2 types of things that you want people to do in safety. There's 2 types of behaviors. There's mandatory behaviors and there's discretionary behaviors. You don't say, pretty please, lockout, tag out. We need to market that to you. Those are things you have to do. But if you want discretionary effort, you have to look at how you're currently branding safety. And a brand isn't just a logo. A brand is how somebody identifies with a product or service or even person. Your safety efforts have a brand. Are you maintaining that brand? Do people see value in the brand? You have to have an ongoing communication plan. People need to continuously know where they're at. But with strategy focus, you have to make sure, not just in headcount reductions, if you have to go through that, but you have to be selective. You have to be precise in the choices that you make and the things that you might stop doing that's no longer adding value. But also from a people-focused perspective, what people need from you is they need direction. They need to know, where are we going and what is it going to look like? On a journey to any place, people need to have that sense of progress. We're getting closer, we're going in the right direction. And it's hard to define that. It's hard to allow people to see that unless we clearly define what success looks like and what progress is going to look like. Not perfection, but continuous improvement. People need to have confidence in the leaders. They need to have confidence that they're following the right leaders. They need to have confidence that if we go in this direction, we're going to be successful. And that goes back to why we have to market what we're trying to do in safety. They need encouragement and empathy. Positive reinforcement is a very important thing. We know the importance of positive reinforcement, especially if we're married. We know the importance of it. But for some reason, when we come to work, we forget it. Think about it in your roles, in your career. How sick and tired are you of all the positive feedback you get in work? We know the importance of it, but sometimes we just forget it. And it doesn't need to be something scheduled on an annual basis. Does everybody know who the Dilbert cartoon is? There's a great Dilbert cartoon, the pointy-haired boss, and Dilbert coming into his office, and the pointy-haired boss was saying, according to my calendar, you're due for a little positive reinforcement. Doesn't need to be some scheduled thing. We have to look at how we come across. Think about that lady. In 30 years, safety conversations was something that you avoid. So we need transparent communication. It needs to be a regular priority. You set the priority as a leader for something based on how often you talk about it. It's not fair, but that's reality. If you talk about safety once a week compared to all the other operational priorities, you send the message that safety is not as important. It's not fair, but that's the reality. We need to be transparent as much as we can and maintain sincerity. People need to know where we're going and what we're challenging, because this is a team effort to get through this. Need to know basis, now is not necessarily the time for that. We need to be consistent. We need to stay on message. As we're doing all of this, it's easy for people to get distracted. I'm going to talk more about this in my session this afternoon. There's a fascinating part of the brain called the reticular activating system. This is a part of your brain that's filtering mechanism, that filters in the important things and filters out the other important things. The example they use in science is a new make and model of a vehicle. Have you ever bought a new make and model of a vehicle and over the next few weeks you see it everywhere? Did those vehicles magically appear? Of course not. You're paying attention to it. People's reticular activating system when it comes to safety changes over time based on the things that we're talking about, based on the risks, based on how we frame safety excellence. If we allow people to think safety excellence means not getting hurt, their ability to recognize risk diminishes over time. In our STEPS book, it's certainly more complex than this, but really what safety is, it's a 3-step process. It really boils down to this. Number 1, knowing the risks. Number 2, knowing the precautions to take to control the risks. And number 3, regularly taking those precautions. What are the most important risks right now, either from an injury or fatality prevention, but also as a low probability, high frequency type of exposure? Do people know the most important risks? If you walk up to anybody and say, what's the most likely thing to get you injured? You'd get the right answer. I worked with an organization. Every location I went to, everybody told me the things that they were focusing on in safety was steel toe, boot protection, and housekeeping. When we looked at their injuries, if they were perfect at steel toe and housekeeping, they would have had an 8% reduction on their injury rate. I like what Drucker said, there's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. A lot of times we do a lot of things on the not most important things. How do we keep the most important thing the most important things? As a customer, the customers out there, the external business strategy, as we look to apply it inside an organization, because there's customers of your safety strategy, there's customers of your safety programs. You have to fight through the noise there. But it's not how do we compete with the production mindset, it's how do we deliver real value? How do we stand out of the crowd? But that means we have to have a focus. We have to keep the most important thing the most important thing. I work with a lot of organizations. They just don't have the time to build cultures. They're project-based organizations. So they have to keep the most important things the most important things. What are the most important things you need people to pay attention to in your organization? Do they know it? You could measure that. Are they regularly taking precautions to avoid those things? You could measure that as well. But we have to look at how we stand out. It's not just how do we compete. That's outdated thinking. It's how do we add value. As Carl said this morning, safety adds value. Organizations that get this realize that how we manage safety is an indicator of how we manage the rest of our organization. But as we get better and better in safety, it moves from how do we reduce risk to how do we add value to the business. So we have to get past this mindset of that we need to compete with the other operational activities. And I've seen companies fall into that trap time and time again, where we try to embed safety into every aspect of operational performance. I get that, and it makes a lot of sense. But when we add activities and things that people don't see value in, we end up disengaging the very people whose engagement is critical for us to be successful. So we have to look at not just how do we compete, how do we add value. So when you look at communicating this, when you look at taking all the things back after you attend this wonderful conference here, make sure people understand where you're going. Make sure they understand what success really looks like. And it has to be defined not just across the organization, but in each area. It needs to be defined in the language that people use around safety. What would you see as a leader in your area? What would you see when visiting work being performed that tells you we should expect great safety performance? Now, the next question is how do we get that in the heads of others? So we have to make sure we communicate this clearly to people. I like what George Barnard Shaw, the Irish playwright, said. He said, the single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it's taken place. We sent signals, we sent an email. Real communication is knowledge transfer. People need to know where we're going and what success looks like. But we also have to have an honest discussion about where we're at and where we've come from. Every organization has evolved in safety over the past 10, 20, 30 years. Every organization has. Change is the only thing constant. People need to know where we're at against where we're going. They need to be able to know precisely what the most important priorities are in safety. It's what I call a one-handed strategy. If you have more strategic priorities than you can fit on one hand, focus is the opportunity. I would rather an organization be great at a few things in safety than mediocre at a bunch, if excellence is their goal. So they need to know where we're going, the most important things that we're going to be focusing on, because people need to see themselves as an actor in the strategy. You need to make sure that you have the right measurements that tell you, yes, we're getting closer to where we all agree we're trying to go, and the things that we're doing are adding real value. That's the key thing here. It's not a matter of more. Now we don't have time. We don't have the luxury of being more, of focusing on more. It's how do we make sure the things we're doing are adding real sustainable value. That's what strategy is all about. But as you leave this conference, I encourage you to be looking for these better practices. Continuously challenge today's practices, the status quo, looking for better ways. I think when we maintain that mindset, that positive discontent, we celebrate our successes, but we know we can always be better. I think that's how we continue to evolve, and I think it's how it brings us out of the times that we're in right now, when we focus on better practices rather than just adopting a best practice and fall into that stop-looking mentality. I think when we look for those better practices, I think we will create new realities to the next generation of leaders that will follow you. Sir Isaac Newton, who discovered the laws of gravity, once said that if I've been able to see further, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. I think when we move forward here, and I think the work that you all as leaders will do over the next several years to improve safety, I think it will create new realities for the next set of leaders that will follow. I think our children depend on that. I think our grandchildren depend on that. So I ask you when you leave this conference to go forth and be the giants we need to create a better and safer tomorrow. Thank you.